Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Men's Human Rights Discord server. We are the official Discord server of the Men Are Human website, the semi-official Discord of the Men's Rights subreddit. This is our Friday, now Saturday chat that we have every week. And this week's topic is about extremism and genders, specifically talking about the fact that we see many people of both genders moving to the extreme sides. We see a lot of males joining and starting to look towards extreme sides, and what possibly causes that, and the reason people are shifting towards more extremes recently. So, for example, you'll notice that there are a lot of extreme movements, or extreme sides to many movements, and there are people moving towards that due to issues, whether it be mental health, whether it be just emotional things, and also just the changes in ideas and things going on.
Yeah, tonight's talk isn't just about those sorts of things. What we are looking at is why feminists become extreme against men, and why terrorist organizations basically form, and why these why it seems to be young men of fighting age who join them and things like that. But honestly, I think I've just pretty much explained the terrorist part. Basically, young men of fighting age often, well, there's a reason we call it fighting age. It's because men of that age tend to go off and join causes, join tribes, because they're of the age where, if this was 10,000, 100,000 years ago, they would be going off and they would be forming like a periphery tribe, next to the regular tribe of like the younger. Basically, what would be happening is you'd have the young people in the tribe and you'd have the old people in the tribe, and those two groups would essentially be two separate sub-tribes, and the sub-tribes would, if the tribe is too large and there's too much friction, those two tribes can break it apart into other tribes. Like, you can have divisions between the young men and other young men and things like that. And basically, though, those are only really the visible parts of the machine, because this is what sociology will tell you, is that young men of fighting age who have a cause will go off and form a tribe around that cause. But what they will leave out is the young women of fighting age will do the exact same thing. They will go off and they will either support the men. If we're talking about traditional society, they'll support the men in their cause and say, yeah, you've got to go and do this thing. You've got to fight the cause. Or they will put pressure on the tribe itself and say, you've got to do something. You've got to do something. Think of the women and children. Or they will basically, nowadays they seem to be engaging a lot more in direct action. So we have seen women going out and burning things down. For example, in New Mexico with the femicide riots, they go round and they burn things down. So I'm trying to explain something very complicated. I don't feel like I'm doing a very good job of it. But maybe other people have thoughts on this.
Can I just check? Can you guys hear me okay?
No.
Oh, wonderful.
Can't hear you at all.
We hear you fine.
You can't hear me, Mar, no?
No,
No, can't hear you at all.
hear
He's
him.
being sarcastic.
He's trolling you.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody can hear him. We're just taking this out of him. We're just taking the mic.
All right, go on, Painter.
It's all right. I was just going to say, you're talking about sort of tribalism and what have you. You could make the argument that both feminism and the men's rights movement are extensions of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
both would be, technically speaking, extremist movements.
Well, no, we're not extremist movements. Well, okay, we are not an extremist movement, but we are a movement, and there is an element of tribalism. There's always an element of tribalism in any group you have, literally any group. We would not be able to form groups at all if there wasn't at least some sort of tribalism. Like, we wouldn't even understand the concept of a group. But what we are doing right now is we are forming essentially a tribe centered around an issue. So we have, what that is in functional terms is an ideology. So we have an ideology which is a tribe centered on an idea or ideas, and we are trying to influence the larger tribe, which is our society, with our ideas. And so this is a non-extremist form of tribalism. So we're on like the bottom of the extremism pyramid. So we're in the reasonable, nice sort of, let's talk about this, let's change things through conversation and through group action and through putting pressure on those in charge. Feminism occupies various strata of the pyramid. So you have the extremely moderate feminists who are at the bottom of the pyramid, who are like, yeah, let's talk about this. But as you go up the pyramid, you get more and more extreme. And the extreme group is smaller than the moderate group. And the very extreme group is smaller than the extreme group. But once you start to get into the extreme areas, there's this push towards being more extreme. So the groups will actually start to filter out people who are less extreme than them. You might see this with, like, there are some MRAs who argue that we shouldn't allow feminists in our spaces. This is a form of that. It's where you filter out opposing views. That's basically stage one on the extremism like ladder. And that's a major reason why I don't allow that. This why I allow feminists in this space is because I understand that the extremism ladder is a very slow, inexorable thing, and you don't even really notice you're on the ladder, and you just become like, somebody has to do something, and then you just become like more like pushed to the edge. There's an edge where you just like the thing you have to do to change things becomes more imminent and more imminent and more imminent, and so you become like, well, we have to get more extreme and more extreme, and you will mentally justify that extremeness. So you have to be very careful about anything that leads to that road. So yeah, that's why we don't ban feminists on this server. It's why we try as hard as possible to allow opposing views, as long as those views aren't insane and disgusting. The problem here is, like, there comes a point where moderate views become insane and disgusting to you because you're so extreme, and it's very hard to know when that happens. So you've got to be very careful about that, and you've got to make sure that you don't shift your Overton window too far in the wrong direction. Otherwise, you're going to end up doing extreme things and thinking that they are normal and justified, and this is just the way everyone else thinks, and that really you're the like an oppressed class or something like that, and you've got to fight back against the oppressor. I mean, the oppressor dynamic is one which is extremely common in groups which become violent. So they will go, look, these people are oppressing us and we've got to do something. But you've got to realize that this frame of thinking is similar to the frame of thinking where people go after minorities. Like, they will say these people have too much power in our society, they're enacting laws that benefit them and stuff like that, they're oppressing us and we've got to get rid of them. It's it's there's a logical train of thinking here. I mean, people say that the slippery slope is a myth, but it's really not. It's it can be used maliciously. Like, you can you can take it to an absurd, but there is a slippery slope, and if you get on a certain logical train, you will go down that slope. So you basically have to be aware that some logical trains on a social level will take you to a particular place naturally. So let's take the example of feminists not liking men. So basically, you have feminists saying, okay, men are a problem. That's the first level. Men are a problem because they are, they're the powerful ones. They're taking our rights away and stuff like that. So next level, what do we do about this? And so it starts off with protests and things like that. But amid the protests, people are saying, well, these protests aren't going to work. Like, you're protesting the men, and the only people who can change things are the men. So we have to take more direct action. And it starts with breaking away and segregating. So you segregate away from the group that you don't like, and you view them with suspicion, and you don't let them into your spaces, you don't let them near you. You create safe spaces where only your group is allowed, and that just breeds more mistrust of the other group and more mistrust, and you start to wonder what they're saying in their groups, and you start to wonder, you start to project onto them their, any bad thoughts you have. So, okay, you have bad thoughts about them, so therefore they must have bad thoughts about you. So this is where you start to get into the Handmaid's Tale sort of territory, where you start to think of yourself as a poor victim and these people are horrible monsters, and it just sort of, like, you're in this group, you're talking to all these people, and slowly, because like you have traumatized people in there as well who have genuine bad experiences with men, and because there's no men in there and they're not able to sympathize with the woman who's in a vulnerable state, and they're not able to show them that while they have been abused by this man, other men are on their side, and so their only supporters are other women, and so those supporters just reinforce the circle and reinforce the circle and reinforce the circle until you get to the point where they start thinking that mandatory, like, castration for men is a good idea because they need to control men's sexuality, because men's sexuality is a problem. Like, then they go further and they go further and they go, men are such a problem that, like, they start all the wars, they do all the bad things in the world, so we have to get rid of the men. We have to, like, stop boys being born. So if there are any boys, if you're having a boy, you have to abort the boy. And then from that onwards, you start to think, well, it's going to take an awful long time to get rid of all these, males just by not allowing any more males to be born. So we have to start directly, attacking them. And that's the point where you start to get what is almost a toddler-like tap and run away sort of mentality, where they start like the breaking windows sort of thing, where they'll see what they can get away with. Like they'll do a small amount of damage and like run away and see what the reaction is, and they'll do a larger amount of damage, run away, see what the reaction is, and it just sort of scales up from there. And that is a fairly standard train towards extremism. Other trains do exist. For example, you can like there's the whole brainwashing idea where somebody who disagrees with you is inducted into the larger group, and that person is then bullied and harassed for every time they express views that are contrary to the group, and then they end up agreeing with the group as a self-defense mechanism. That's another common way to do it. There are loads of different routes, is what I'm saying.
I feel like all of this is going to happen in the MGTOW community.
I actually kind of had the MGTOW community sort of in the back of my mind when I was saying that, because we have looked at MGTOW servers tentatively to see about aligning with them, and we look around in there and we find moderators and admins making extremely sexist remarks about women and scoffing about them and so on. And yeah, and so like that's going to reinforce that attitude, and it's going to keep feeding back into itself because they don't have any women there and they don't allow them in that space. So, or any women who do turn up immediately leave because they see how awful it is, and them blowing up on the server and yelling at them for being nasty just reinforces the attitude, because like they view this is an example of why they should be sexist. So yeah, this is like the stage 2 part of the extremism ladder. This is like a couple of rungs up from thinking that the other party has a problem. And I do see certain groups of MRAs going down this route, and I don't like it, and we should try and stop it. We have seen MRA groups say we've got to sequester ourselves away from feminists, we've got to block ourselves off, we've got to build a defensive fortress online where they can't get in. And this just leads to extremism. It leads to more and more extreme thoughts, where the only safe place is your little bunker and everything out there is danger zone. And yeah, it becomes like the extremism starts to become encouraged, and you start to think, okay, we've got to do more, we've got to keep doing more, and the more becomes more destructive and more violent as you go on. It's like nobody, not even the Nazis, started with mass killings. They started very small, very angry, but they started very small, and they started with like just pushing, just a little bit of pushing, and then they push a bit more, and they push a bit more, and then they do things like they make the Havara Agreement, which is, if I'm remembering the right name, is when they wanted to ship Jews out of the country. And Ken Livingstone actually got in a lot of trouble for mentioning this, so I hope I don't get in trouble for it. But they started they started making that sort of agreement. They want to ship them out of the country. But then they get more extreme, and they get more extreme, and the extreme voices in the movement, which were almost always there from the beginning, become louder and louder, and the moderate voices become softer and softer, and then it becomes dangerous to be a moderate and you get something like the night of I think it was the night of the long knives, where they killed a bunch of people in their own party who were like not as extreme, and it became basically you get a purity spiral where you have to conform to the identity of the group, and if you don't, you're out, or you get bullied until you conform. Usually they'll try and bully you to conform, and then they chuck you out if they but that's basically what is happening in feminist spaces. You have this purity spiral where they don't allow extreme views, but what they count as an extreme view starts to become any criticism of feminism. So you'll end up with moderators saying, "Nope, you're banned. You know, you're a troll for saying anything that goes against feminism." Like this is what they do in Men's Lib. That you if you say anything against feminism, you're breaking the rules and you're a troll. This is a feminist friendly space. Out you go. It's an ideological purity mechanism. So yeah, this is essentially yeah, it is tribalism. It's us versus them, and encouraging tribalism in somebody else's country is a great way to destabilize it. Is all I'm going to say, because if I say any more on that, we'll end up going off into politics and we'll start talking about communism. But yeah, I think I've pretty much established like that. If anyone wants to push back or enlarge on what I'm saying, please do. This is not a overtly tribalistic space, so feel free to contradict everyone if you want to.
Thanks, Mo. Wanted to jump in really quick about the mention of MGTOW and MGTOW communities. Every time I hear that expression, it gives me a little dissonance because
I said community because I didn't want to say movement.
No,
because
I know
it's a philosophy and not.
Believe me, I hear that frequently, and for the very same reason. But the ones who claim they have gone their own way, and they communalize, I guess their selves together. It's not men going their own way. That's a collection of men not going anywhere. Okay, I have gone my own way, right? And I find no home in those quote communities. There's no place for me there.
The problem of the communities is that they start to become the main voice of the philosophy.
True enough. Which is why I don't identify as a MGTOW. I enact having gone my own way. And the ones that gather themselves together and start talking crap about women, they're the ones who fail to see the difference. That's just a reality.
To generalize.
What?
The problem starts when you start to generalize
Yep.
about a certain group of people.
Yep. And
you can say that statistically most things are that way because that's objective.
Yes, so long as the majority will allow that to happen. Yeah, you're right. Going back to what Ma was talking about, these things that occur naturally, I always have a little healthy distrust of that, because I always believe that, or I do believe that these things, tribalism and echo chambering and, in and out grouping, he's right. It always does occur as long as everyone turns the other way and ignores it. In the feminist spaces that I frequent, because I can, okay, I find a lot of the same thing. Where as long as it's allowed to become extreme, or unreasoning or defaulting to just what happens, quote, naturally, then of course it happens, but whenever I do see that, I always hear a lot of dissatisfaction with that. It's like, well, it always seems to turn out this way and I don't know why. So it turns out that way because everybody lets it. And on our side of the fence, I see a lot of the same thing where we will, we'll be disgruntled and resentful and outraged about the behavior of the other, while at the same time, constantly claiming that, at least as men, we just are the way we are because our biology. And I'm like, so if we are just, if we're just chained to that, what are we talking about? What if we're doomed to this, then why struggle? I don't believe we're doomed to that, and I don't believe they are either. But when it is permitted by inaction, it will happen. I mean, the MGTOW community is a perfect example. It might have done some really good things. It failed to do so, not because of what it was doing, but because of what it refused to do. And like I said, we dance around the edge of that cliff all the time. And if we don't, as individuals, take responsibility and say, no, I am not going to outgroup the other, and no, I am not going to follow blindly somebody that tells me, women are all trash. If I do that, what can I expect to happen? If I just ignore it, it'll never go away. It'll always be there and it'll always grow. And like I say, when I speak to these women who are more feminist aligned, I say the same thing because they complain to me about the same problem. I just tell them, if you don't do anything about that, it will get worse. I do believe in human nature, but I also believe in, human action. And, it's still a matter of personal choice. We either choose to avoid extremism and avoid echo chambers and othering and all the rest of it, or we don't. If we don't, then we will get what we get. It's, that's inevitable. There is no stopping that. There's only preventing it in the first place. That's the way things are. If you want something to just kind of shrug and accept, it's that. Anyway,
tribalism is really that it feels good and it feels right.
Yeah. You know what? You're right, Ma. It does feel good and it feels right and proper. So what? A lot of things feel good to me. I'm a really severe alcoholic, and nothing feels better, on a really hot, sweaty afternoon than an ice cold beer. That is a fact of life, and I have a choice of either succumbing to that good feeling or not. Either one, both of those have a cost. One is a bargain, the other is a ripoff.
I feel the same way about chocolate banana ice cream smoothies, but it's a poison that feels good, and like a lot of poisons out there, I mean, you could call it a drug if you wanted. Tribalism is kind of a drug, to the point where if people don't have anything left to be tribalistic about, if they've won, then one of the signs of social decay is that they will keep on fighting a battle that's already won. So it's like feminists won't admit quite often that the pay gap is actually their own fault. Like it's just purely, mostly their own fault. It's purely based on earnings and so on. Like there are some men who pay less than some industries and vice versa. But it is mostly the fault of women, I should say, rather than feminists. It's fault is a bad word, really. What's actually happening is just that they are prioritizing things other than money, and that's fine. That's not a bad thing. Like being the CEO isn't fun. Like it can feel really good, like being in charge of everything and saying, your will is law. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those awful work 40 hours a day sort of things where like you barely sleep and you have no time for anything because your life is job. And that's okay for some people. Some people revel in that, but it's not really healthy.
No, it's not. And if let's say if the people suffering from it, many of whom are women, were really offered that choice. Look, you can prioritize your career, or you can prioritize your family and other non-employment interests, but you have to pick one. It's like you do have to pick one. You don't have to completely not be a worker if you want family. You don't have to completely abandon family if you want to be a worker. But one of them is going to get the priority in your life, at the expense of the other. You still have to figure out which one you really want. And listening to other people tell you what to think and what you want is never a good idea, because they don't know. They are happy to tell you, but that's to satisfy their own interests, not yours. And as I say, we face the same dilemma, right? Extremists on our side of the fence are just eager and happy, to tell us what's important and what to think and what to put a priority on, so that we will so that we will, nurture resentment for the out group and never pay attention to what they're doing. It's like you can scale that down to families. You can scale it all the way up to, national governments and international trade and international politics. As long as you're not paying attention to what the the ruling class at any scale, as long as you're not paying attention to what they're doing because you're too busy, slap fighting with your sister, they keep getting whatever they want, right? And it works every time. But that's a matter of not pushing back against our own nature, and not pushing back against our own sort of default positions. It can be done, but it's not easy, and it's not always comfortable, and it requires sacrifice. But so does continuing to ignore these things. If we continue to ignore them, then we will get what we get. There is no stopping that.
What's going on?
We're here. What's going on with you?
Ma.
Hello.
So you say
Yeah. Sorry, Vic.
you said the talk was about gender issues and
Yeah.
gender stuff
Yeah.
related.
The talk is about extremism in gender-based
Okay,
topics.
okay. So my question is, if like an a movement about egalitarianism called, as I said before, egalitarianism was to be created and to become famous and to have many members, would you think there would be any kind of extremism? Like, I cannot imagine how egalitarianism as a movement could become toxic, or like feminism.
You don't understand how our movement could become toxic.
No,
what you're
I
saying.
understand. I understand how our movement could become toxic, but I don't understand how movement about egalitarianism, and I'm not talking about the MRA. I'm talking about
Oh,
egalitarianism itself.
Simply,
well,
you'll
uh,
get people who'll say that you can't be egalitarian enough, or you're not
Okay.
being egalitarian enough. It's like we've had people come through the service saying you're not being MRA enough, and you'll get people go through feminist service
No,
saying
but
you're
the
not
thing
being
is not
enough of a feminist.
what will happen if a movement like that about egalitarianism becomes extreme. Like, would it be like communism?
I think communism might be the most extreme example of an attempt at egalitarianism, I suppose. You say
Okay.
everybody's equal, but obviously, if you look at sort of communist Russia and what have you,
Yeah,
and communist
the
Eastern
leader is
Europe,
not equal to the others.
yeah,
Some are more equal.
yeah.
What are
So
you guys talking about?
Talking about extremism.
Okay.
Then how would you make a movement that cannot get extreme?
I don't think you can. I think it'd be
the-
virtually impossible, to be honest.
I mean, I surely know that self-criticism could be one of the keys to not make the movement go extreme, but I don't know anything other than that.
it's definitely a big key, and it's one of the reasons that we try to encourage self-criticism here. We encourage people to go through our sources and point to ones which aren't any good. We encourage people to try and debunk our arguments on the Discord. It's you have to be very, very careful. The problem is that when you have a movement, it might not be the main movement that goes extreme. It might be a small group of people within that movement who are like, we don't like how non-extreme this movement is, so let's form our own mini movement, call it by the same name, but add, like some asterisks to that maybe, or not even that. Just call it by the same name usually, and then make that movement as extreme as they want to.
Do you think left-wing male advocates is going to become like that?
They might. Any group can.
No, I mean,
Like Ma was just saying, there's no collective, there's no community, there's no kind of group of any kind that can't toxify and degrade by at least inaction, by complacency. Really, I mean, think of a church, that can start out, with all the very best intentions and degrade into, iniquity. Obviously, at least, in America, we had a two-party system that was supposed to, lead us perpetually into a future full of,
Yeah, that's false.
truth, justice, and the American way. And this is where we are now. We have I'm using the past tense. We have failed at that. We are not in the process of failing. It's over. We lost.
Yeah, the two-party system has collapsed to the point where the two parties are essentially one party with two faces, and they both seem to be calling each other Nazis. So I mean, this is one of the things that you do have to watch out for if you have a
You have
purity.
good reason to call them both Nazis.
Yeah, well, you get people. Nazi is a meaningless word now. It's lost all meaning. Unless you're being very specific, you have to say you mean the specific actual Nazi party. But like what it means is your side bad now. That's all it really means. Your side bad. And so you have one side going, you're the your side bad people. And the other side's going, no, you're the your side bad people. And I know that sounds like nonsense, but it's basically what's happening. It is just tribalism. It's like there is if you take a video of two sides fighting, whichever side you show first will be interpreted by the viewer quite often as good guys. So if you just have two sides fighting, like red versus blue, like I actually noticed this by watching like a bunch of videos, just animated stop motion Lego battles, just because I thought stop motion was amazing at the time. But I noticed that there's a tendency to assume that the group that you see first is the good guys, and the group you see second is the bad guys, or to assume that I mean, especially if you start with blue. Like if you start with blue, blue's a nice soft color. Red is a hard, sharp color. So you assume that red are the aggressors. And so it's like in chess. People assume for some reason that white are the good guys because they attack first. But white are actually the aggressors. So it's white starts the chess war. And it's very subtle. And I'm not sure exactly why people think like this. I think it's because they just associate, like the group they see first is the one they mentally associate with or something.
Well, red and blue is to do with the military. If you say someone's on the red four or red force, it means they're the bad guys, as far as you are concerned. And I think with stuff like chess, with you got terms like whiter than white, which means something is immensely pure. I don't know how true that actually is, but I think that's where that sort of thinking comes in.
I have noticed that people who are obsessed with a particular thing tend to either end up embodying that thing or embodying the exact opposite. So it really depends on the group. So it's like a lot of domestic violence, people who talk about domestic violence are actually extremely violent people. Like, a good example is Amber Heard. Like, people will virtue signal that they are the good guys by latching onto a particular movement which is seen as good, and then they'll use that as coverage, as camouflage, and they'll say, I'm part of this, me too, and actually they were the aggressor. And this is something which is extremely common in domestic violence circles. Like there's this show called Maid, based on a book of, I think, the same name. And if you actually read the book, from what I've been told, you start to realize that the woman telling the story was probably the abusive one, or at least she was abusive too. Because it seems very, very clear from in this book that it's kind of a revenge book. Like she's basically painting all these people as awful people. Like all these men as awful people.
What's the name of the book?
Well, the series is called Maid. The book might be called something different though.
Okay.
But it's there was actually a feminist article a while ago about how compulsive it was watching May, and how the woman writing the article empathized with the female character so much that she started laying into her husband and saying he's the problem, he's like one of the evil men. And this is how propaganda works, really. You take a fictional example of something happening, and of your enemy being a bad people, and then you put it around and you apply all the dramatic music, and you get the audience on the side of the main character and stuff like that. And then you rely on the fact that once the audience has left the theaters, they will then treat it mentally, that story, as if they'd actually witnessed it happening. This is something this is one of the most dangerous parts of stories. This is why feminists don't say we need to promote the truth. They say we need to control the narrative, because if you can control the story, you can control everything.
Right.
And humans mentally view everything in terms of stories. Well, not everything, but they view the larger events of their life as a sort of story. They view they start talking about, if you ask somebody to talk about their childhood, they'll start telling you stories. If you ask them how their day was, they'll tell you stories. So we view our lives almost like a film. So if you insert a film with certain ideas into somebody's head, they will start to internalize those ideas. This is the basis of propaganda theory. This is how propaganda essentially works, is people start to confuse what's on screen with what's real in a very, very subtle way that goes beyond merely thinking the main characters are real. Because you can think the main characters are fictional. You can know the actor, you can be following the actor around and know that they've played so many different parts, and you can be a fan of the actor and all that sort of stuff. And you can know how films work, and you can know how lighting works and everything. But you put somebody in front of that moving image, and there's a very deep part of their brain which goes, I am witnessing this in real time. I am seeing real events. And that has a small but significant effect on that person. And then you go and you reinforce that through other media things. You tell people in media articles and things that this is real, and they start to fully believe it. And this is why people think that if you tie a chain to the back axle of a car and then that car drives away, the back axle will come flying out from underneath the car because they witnessed it in films. It's not actually a real thing. It doesn't actually happen. I mean, you'd have to actually, like, specifically rig the car for this to happen. It's like people think that you can cling to the bottom of a car while it's in motion. You can't. You'd be off that car in like half a second. But people don't see that the rig the stuntman is attached to. All they see is what they're supposed to in the film. And so this influences their mind in a very subtle way. So especially if what they're seeing is then backed up by other people who think the same thing and think the same thing, it's a feedback loop. So the same thing happens in extreme communities. You have a news story that paints men as bad. You have another news story that paints men as bad. And then people will create a list of these stories and they'll share them around. And they'll share them and internalize everything inside them. And ultimately, this solidifies their views to the point where they think that they have reality. And anyone who goes against them is a troll. You know, like, I read this in a newspaper. This must be true. I've read this in multiple newspapers. This must be true. It's kind of one of those basic levels of thinking that people really should be taught out of when they're children. It's like, just because you read it in the newspaper doesn't mean it's true. In fact, if you read something in a newspaper, there's a good chance it's false, especially nowadays, what with so many big ideologies controlling the news. I mean, like 30 years ago, back when the news was just the news, mostly, and there were just opinion pieces on the side, maybe it was a little bit less so. But nowadays, it's like everything has to have a concerted message. Like, the message has to be maintained. Hollywood films are on board with this, like everyone telling the same story over and over and over and over again to drum it in. And people start to believe it.
Oh, so I think the real question is, because everybody is prone to the kind of things that you're describing, that we're vulnerable to being influenced by propaganda, storytelling, all of that, and that that children are vulnerable to being indoctrinated. What do we do, right? It's like, while you were talking, I was thinking, things like, well, if we're going to make rules, maybe the number one rule is never become complacent. Never feel as though you've arrived. Because once you do that, then, as you say, human nature does take over. And, we tend to allow things to happen in our groups and communities and within ourselves that, when we got started, we would never have accepted. So I have my own, my own ideas about it, but, if we're going to ask questions about what to do, let's ask questions about what to do. Because what I don't want is to, be encouraged to pay attention to any kind of propaganda or conditioning or focus on one problem or another at the expense of ignoring what's going on in my own backyard. And I say that because these are the same things that I talk about and encourage with the feminist types that I hang around. I tell them the same thing, because they get unhappy and frustrated with extremism in their movement. And I say, well, it will continue, until you stop it, and that's just the way it is. I say, we're vulnerable to the same thing, and if we stop at saying, well, golly, there's nothing we can do about it, it's inevitable and human, blah, 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 then yeah, I mean, what would we expect to happen? But if we say, maybe that is human nature, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be tolerant of it, and it doesn't mean I'm going to ignore it when it goes on, and it doesn't mean I'm not going to encourage my fellows to be intolerant of it.
Yeah, there are studies suggesting that if you read statements saying that free will is not real, you'll make more arbitrary and more extreme choices. So if you're told in the experiment, it was like if you're told free will isn't real, then you're given a choice, like you're told to make somebody a sandwich, and you're much less likely to obey their preferences regarding how much chili to put on that sandwich.
I've seen the same thing, and I've seen that originate from people who actually insist that there is no such thing as free will, like people like Sam Harris and a few others of that ilk, that we're designed to believe and to exercise ourselves as if our choices were entirely personal, when the reality is, that it's a series of complex biomechanics that are still inevitable, that you will make one decision or the other, based on how the universe is arranged, and it has nothing to do with free will. I don't buy that. I mean, it's one of those things, it's an extreme statement and it requires extreme evidence. So I disbelieve that idea, but only for my own reasons. I'm not afraid of the idea that I might not have free will. I just don't believe it. I'm just not buying it. But speaking of free will, whenever I hear the bioessentialist argument that we're all just slaves to our urges and our hormones and our our monkey glands, I always think the only reason human beings are human beings is because of our forebrain and cerebral cortex, and the fact that with those, we can countermand any instinct that comes up. I'm wearing a pair of glasses, right? And I take diabetes medication. I'm living, because I refuse to play the hand I was dealt. That's why we're not just monkeys, why we're not just running a script. Our distant ancestors abandoned the safety and reliability of instinct in favor of the versatility of intellect and choice. So, like I say, when I hear people saying, might as well give up, this is just the way things are, it's like, well, if we were bonobos, yeah, you're right, that's the way it would be. We're not. We can't survive that way. We abandoned that perch a long time ago. We're humans, and there's nothing we can do about it. We are forced to make choices.
Yeah, I've found that people who have overcome addiction particularly tend to believe in free will, and that people who are addicted and who are very, very addicted and don't feel like they can get out don't believe in free will generally. And I feel like that makes it harder for them to overcome the addiction. But the truth is, you can actually completely rewire your brain. You can, there's a part of you, I mean, I won't get into metaphysics or anything, but there's a part of you that can override everything else. And we don't know what that part is in terms of materialistic science, or if it even is understandable by materialistic science, but there is a part there. And tyrannies don't like free will as a general rule. If you go to a tyrannical regime and you talk to the people, they will generally be of the viewpoint that there is no way to change anything. Like there's no changing anything at all. Like you go to the Soviet Union back at its peak, you wouldn't have been able to change anything. Like there's no changing anything. You go to China, you'll find this right now. You'll find the same viewpoint. They actually have a word for it in Chinese. I don't think I can remember what the actual word is, but like it basically means there's nothing we can do. So, like an example, that I was given for this was the guy went to this place and he just needed something off of a USB stick or something, and the guy had a laptop right in front of him, and he said, "No, there's nothing I can do, nothing at all." Is the guy going up there says, "But there's a laptop right there," and the guy at the counter's like, "Oh," and he got to use this USB thing on the laptop. It's it might have been a phone, I can't remember, but it's like a frame of it's a mental framework that limits you quite seriously. If you start thinking that you don't have free will, you'll start acting as if you don't have free will a little bit. I mean, people who think they don't have free will tend to still make a lot of choices that kind of imply the opposite, but you get what I'm saying. It's a complicated thing, but I think we've gone off into the weeds a bit and into philosophy, and we should probably get back down to the extremism thing, or perhaps shut off the stream, as it is getting quite a bit far along, I think.
Yeah. Well, really though, just quickly, the idea of avoiding extremism and what it takes, sort of drags us into philosophy, and for some people even metaphysics. But to keep it to keep it something people can keep in mind, that we have a community, and we have a purpose. We're not just hanging out because that we're agreed that any one of us can fall victim to extremism, and unreasoning, rigidity, right? It's of all the things that we could do to ourselves, that's probably the worst, right? Because then anyone in opposition to us, all they have to do is stand still and wait while we tear ourselves apart, right? The very far left is learning that the hard way right now. The far left has always been something of a circular firing squad, and now it's worse than ever. We don't have to do that if we all collectively don't want to, but we have to decide that we don't want to. We have to decide that every one of us is, as to use the language of the opposition, every one of us is valid. Every one of us is honorable in our own way if we choose to be. But when we get together, we have to choose to be. It's not going to happen on its own, and it's not going to happen in time for us, to fix the problems that we have. If anybody is, feeling uncomfortable about holding the line and remaining moderate and open and generous. Just remember, we do not have an infinite amount of time to fix these problems. Very quickly, we will come to a point where there's nothing anyone can do about it, and everybody will lose. That's not 1,000 years from now. I might see it in my own lifetime, and I don't have that much of it left.
The next 10 years are going to be very rough.
They are.
There are other countries who are extremely totalitarian who would rather like the West to fail so that they can bring about a endless darkness where they are at the head and they have control over everything. And they see us as weak enemies who are fighting amongst themselves, and they've probably encouraged quite a lot of it. So we need to start uniting as much as possible. We need to build culture. We need to export. We need to be exporting culture, not destroying and dismantling culture. That's because while other people are like, we don't want tribalism between countries. We want like a unified world. We want people to be like sharing ideas across boundaries and borders. We don't want to basically say, okay, we're going to stop fighting each other and start fighting other people. That's not what I'm saying here. We need to start fighting our worst instincts instead.
Right. And as I say, at least for me, from that perspective and with those tools, that's how I find it so easy, to sit with people that, ordinarily I wouldn't be able to sit with and talk to. Is not that I am trying to avoid internal fighting so that we can all fight with them. It's like I told somebody here last week, I don't want to win anything. I want for this to be over with now and forever. I don't want, for it to go quiet for a little while like it has all my life and then spring up again, in some new form. I want it done. And that means there's things that I have to give up, and there's things that I have to do, and there's things that I have to make clear, because those people, just like you all, they understand that the boundaries that I have from my own life are absolute. They keep me out of reach, right? But that by doing that, that means I can just sit quietly and talk and say, look, things aren't working this way. Maybe they never have. Either we come up with something a little more useful and a little more practical, or we all go down together. I told people in my NCFM group before, regardless of anything we think of each other, men and women specifically, we're bound together at the neck. We might not like it and we might be sick of it, but that's the way it is. It's the way it's always been. We're either going to get along or we're going to tear each other apart. Make a decision, make it now. And I say that to you, I say that to them too.
Well, thank you for the wonderful points, and thank you everyone for being here. It's been a wonderful chat. Sorry, but we're gonna have to cut it here today, folks. It's been wonderful having you. We love having you guys here every week. This is the Men Human Rights Discord chat. We're here now every Saturday at 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. Central, which is 3 p.m. UK. And if you ever have a topic you want to recommend, you can message Ma, you can message Blue, you can message myself. Just let us know. And see you all next week.